And then, Andrew, can I ask you to keep an eye on the lobby while we get started?
Sure thing.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Rachel Cheeseman, and I'm the policy manager with Prosperity Indiana. And we are very excited to be talking to you all today about the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. I want to kick us off before we introduce our guest speakers with a little bit of information about Prosperity Indiana and some other opportunities to engage with our work that are coming up. So, if you are not familiar with Prosperity Indiana, we are the statewide association for community economic development. And we engage nonprofit partners, we engage financial institutions, some municipal government entities. We have about 200 members across the state, representing all 92 Indiana counties. And our goal is to basically build prosperous communities here in Indiana and see thriving neighborhoods and households. We do that through our REAP framework involving resources, engagement, advocacy, and programs. Today, you're here for a little bit of the advocacy, and we wanted to share some information about some major legislation that has passed, and you'll get to learn more about the history of advocacy that has led to this moment. And we at Prosperity Indiana are very proud to be a part of that. I also want to give a quick shout out to the Nina Mason Pulliam Charitable Trust. They are generous sponsors of our work, including much of our work on housing affordability, advocacy, and education. So thank you very much to them. I'm going to, as I mentioned, talk about some opportunities to continue engaging with Prosperity Indiana's network and our work across the state. And then I also want to give a quick shout out to some opportunities to take action, and then we will get right into the content of today's program. And again, we have a lot to get through, so I'm going to try to move through these first couple parts really quick so you have as much time as possible to hear from our guest experts. Our next webinar is coming up next week on Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. It is all about cryptocurrency and why it matters, even if you do not personally own any crypto. It's sort of getting its fingers into more and more of the economy, and our guest expert from the Brookings Institution, Tanansan Carmona, is going to be sharing some more information about the implications that has for us as participants in the economy. We also have a book discussion coming up. It's going to be over the lunch hour on August 28th. I can send more about that in our follow-up email. But basically, if you have heard about the book, There Is No Place for Us by Brian Goldstone, we just wanted to give an opportunity for folks to read it through the month of August. You can read some of it, none of it, part of it, or all of it, and join us for a discussion on August 28th. I don't know if the discounted price on the ebook is still available. That was for a while, but I don't know if that's continuing. So just a quick caveat, that special pricing period might be over. But the discussion is free. So you can get the book from your library or, purchase the ebook and read the book and join us to discuss. Lastly, on the opportunities to take action, the federal budget is still in progress, and there are some big changes to HUD that we think would sort of deprioritize essential services in things like housing counseling and homeless services and other critical areas that provide housing stability to people all across the country, including here in Indiana. So if you are so motivated, please, you can follow that QR code to request or to contact your lawmakers and let them know that housing stability and affordability needs to remain a core function and a major investment of the resources we send to HUD. Lastly, save the date. Prosperity Indiana's State House Day is going to be on January 21st in the morning. We'll be in the South Atrium of the State House, and we hope to see all of you there to continue advocating for housing affordability and stability for all Hoosiers here in Indiana with us at the State House in the new year. And the other quick thing is that Prosperity Indiana's work especially in advocacy, takes place through coalitions. We have the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition, the Indiana Assets and Opportunity Work, as well as our statewide network that is Prosperity Indiana. So if you are interested to learn any more about those or to just sign up for updates, you can use those QR codes. And if you'd like to learn more about what the coalitions are and how we function, please feel free to use that link on this slide to book a quick meeting with me, and I can give you a more thorough introduction of our coalition work. Now I'm going to hand it to Andrew to sort of tee us up in this conversation about housing affordability to talk about housing affordability in Indiana.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And Rachel, thanks so much for putting together this conversation. Really looking forward to hearing from our guests, Libby, Kayla, and Stephen. Before we did, though, I just want to put this in context of why this legislation is so badly needed in Indiana. We think of Indiana as being a relatively affordable place to live, but that's not always the case, especially as you go down the income spectrum. In fact, Indiana, as you see in front of us, has the lowest rate of affordable and available housing for extremely low income renters in the Midwest. And you can see on the right, there's only 34 affordable and available homes for every 100 of those extremely low income families here in the state. So there's a real supply problem that also is compounded by a lack of affordability. And if we go to the next slide, I want to point out you'll get a copy of all these slides, so don't worry. This is from our brand new report that is co-released with the National Low Income Housing Coalition called Out of Reach. And according to this brand new report, we know that a modest two-bedroom rental home, it takes a renter household in Indiana $24.13 an hour to be able to afford that without being cost burdened. The problem is that the average renter household only makes $19.29. And in fact, those housing costs has increased so fast over the past few years that average renter household, I'm not talking about low income, the average renter household has seen a loss of almost $8,000 in purchasing power of their income. And in fact, as you can see here, 14 of Indiana's 20 largest occupations does not pay enough to afford a modest two-bedroom rental. And in fact, the average Indiana occupation wage still now does not pay enough to afford that modest two-bedroom. So all of these federal investments are really important, the policies that you hear. But as we're going to discuss, it's going to be really important that we get the most out of these federal policies and that we have a coordinated state and federal housing strategy to be able to fill that gap and put housing in reach for Hoosiers. So with that, Rachel, let me turn it back to you, and really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much. And now it is time for us to introduce our guest experts for today. We are very grateful to be joined by Libby O'Neill and Kayla Gilchrist at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. We are Indiana's state affiliate partner for the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So a lot of our advocacy work, we are working hand in glove with our national partners to make sure that federal priorities, in addition to the state level advocacy that we do, are complementing each other. And Andrew sort of mentioned, we want to have a coordinated housing strategy to maximize the opportunities for low income renters to have the housing that they deserve. And our partnership with the National Low Income Housing Coalition really helps us do that. And we also have Stephen Meyer here from Intend Indiana. He is leading an organization that spearheads a lot of affordable development in the state and promotes opportunities for people to become homeowners and small business owners. And they will both tell you a little bit more about their organizations now.
Hey everyone, I'm Libby O'Neill from National Low Income Housing Coalition. I work on the policy team here, and I'm joined by my colleague, Kayla Gilchrist, who works on the organizing team. So I'll kick it over to Kayla if your audio is working to share a little bit more about our organization.
Hey y'all, we're so grateful to be here with y'all in community. My name is Kayla, as Libby said. Yeah, we're grateful to be in this conversation. So for those of you that may not be familiar with us, we're from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So as the slide said, our organization is dedicated to achieving racially and socially equitable public policy that ensures that the folks with the lowest incomes have quality homes that are accessible to them and affordable in communities of their choice, right? So folks can live where they want to be at prices that are affordable to them. So our organization does lots of things, but it's all sort of compiled in these three areas, which are robust research. We advocate for really important policy, and we also organize in the field to support local and statewide communities and coalitions to move meaningful housing policy in their areas, as well as collaborate on the federal level to move federal policy and defend at the federal level things that need defense. So we work in partnership with lots of organizations and with and on behalf of those at the lowest incomes. And so our makeup as a coalition is of state and tribal partners like Prosperity Indiana, that was mentioned, and other members of the organization, both individuals and organizational members, all across the country. So again, we're really grateful to be here. I'm going to kick it back to Libby to get us started.
Real quick, before we dive into that, I wanted to give the floor to Stephen to tell our guests a little bit about Intend Indiana.
Thank you. I'm Stephen Meyer. I'm the CEO of Intend Indiana, and we are a statewide nonprofit that engages in community development around the state through our 4 initiatives. Very excited to be here with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Very grateful for their advocacy and research. We've benefited from it for years. And as a past president of the Prosperity Indiana Board, being a strong partner of statewide coalitions like Prosperity Indiana has been incredibly invaluable to the entire state. So grateful for them joining us today.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And now let's talk about what it's the reason for the season. Let's talk about this bill.
It's housing season. All right. Thank you, Rachel. So I'm sure you all have heard the news about the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. It's a huge bipartisan housing package. It was passed about a month ago. It has a lot of great pieces in it. And today I'm going to be focusing on specifically the impacts to low income households. So, out of 59 provisions, there's a lot going on with this bill, but I'm going to highlight a few, including ones that National Low Income Housing Coalition has been advocating for a long time, and a few others that we identified throughout the process of this bill that will have a more direct impact on low income households. So the next slide just has a little bit of a background. This has been a long time coming. Years even before there was something called Road to Housing, there was tons of advocacy being done, people putting together bills, reworking them year after year with different members of Congress and building up that support so that finally, when there was an opportunity to have the housing package, those bills were ready. So many years, probably even decades for some of these bills. But then last summer, we saw the first introduction of something called the Road to Housing Act. And over the last 12 months, there was this kind of back and forth between the Senate and the House. They were coming up with different versions of a housing package that had a little bit of overlap, but a lot of different pieces in them. So that back and forth finally eventually resulted in a version of the bill that both chambers agreed on in June of 2026. And then in July, just about a month ago, Road to Housing, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act became law. So next slide shows how popular this bill is. It is bipartisan, passed with an overwhelming majority in both chambers, 85-5 in the Senate, 358-32 in the House, and no votes from Indiana lawmakers. So this is a very popular bill. Lots to be excited about. A huge accomplishment on the part of both advocates and lawmakers. So as I mentioned, there's 59 provisions in this bill. So it's kind of hard to say this bill is just one thing. So these are some of the areas that are included in the provisions. In general, people are kind of characterizing it as a supply bill and a program reform bill. But there's really a lot in there. So I'll just highlight a couple of these: disaster recovery, rural housing, homelessness. There's a few things in there related to manufactured housing. And then there's a lot related to incentivizing local governments or allowing local governments to have more flexibilities or to make changes to their local zoning. So some of this is happening, at the federal level within HUD, but there's also things in here to incentivize and empower state and local governments to take actions to improve housing supply. So moving on to the next slide, I wanted to highlight a few bills that are included in the 21st Century Road to Housing Act that our organization and our network have really been pushing for many years. So the top three there are the Reforming Disaster Recovery Act, the Rural Housing Service Reform Act, and a couple of provisions from a bill called the Choice in Affordable Housing Act. And I'm going to share a little bit about those three bills in particular. And then there's a list of other bills that we've highlighted that that would have impacts on low-income households. And these slides will be shared out so you can look over that list and learn more about those provisions as well. So next slide goes into some details about first the Reforming Disaster Recovery Act. So the National Low-Income Housing Coalition houses a group called the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition, and it's a coalition of over 900 state and local organizations that have experience responding to disasters. And so this group has been advocating for this particular bill for many, many years, and we were really thrilled to see its inclusion in the Road to Housing Act, and then its passage in the final bill last month. So what does this bill do, the Reforming Disaster Recovery Act? It authorizes HUD's Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery, or CDBG-DR program for 3 years. Initially, this provision provided for permanent authorization of CDBGR, and that is the ultimate goal. But as with many laws, there's a lot of compromising. And so we ended up with 3-year authorization. Of course, part of the next steps moving forward with advocacy are pushing for permanent authorization. So a little bit about this program. CDBG-DR provides grants to areas that are impacted by disasters, and it helps them recover and better prepare for the future by rebuilding housing and infrastructure, providing rental assistance, and carrying out mitigation and resilience activities and aiding in economic development. So that's something important about this program is that not only does it help communities rebuild, but it helps them rebuild in a way that's going to make them less vulnerable to damage in the future. We all know that disasters are happening at, more frequently and more severely. So we really need a lot of mitigation for the future. And you might be wondering also how this program compares to FEMA. So FEMA comes into disaster areas immediately following a disaster, and they have a timeline at which they have to, leave a community. So the CDBG-DR program is really meant to provide long-term disaster relief. So we all know that unfortunately, it can take years for communities to recover from disasters. And so CDBG-DR can stay with communities longer. And I will do a little bit of clarification. So these are RDRA, Reforming Disaster Recovery Act, is included in Road to Housing. So all of the bills that I'm going to talk about today are part of the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. There's some things in addition that this bill does. Sorry, Rachel, can you go back just one moment? I'll highlight a couple of things. Some of the things we've been really pushing for is that the program ensures that low and moderate income households are getting the disaster recovery funds that they need, making sure that renters get the funds they need as well. Next slide, please. So as I said, it's helping communities with long-term recovery. A lot of people think of disasters and they think of like just hurricanes, but this can be for any communities that experience disasters. There's no such thing as a small disaster. Every disaster has a huge impact on their communities, even if they're not making national news. So Indiana has received funding from this program, including after some tornadoes and severe flooding in 2023 and after severe storms and flooding in 2008. And something that the RDRA does is it provides us an opportunity to rework the allocation formula to better capture the needs of rural communities. So that's something that stakeholders have pointed out is a need. And so that's something that in our advocacy as this provision is being implemented, we can, we can really try to target certain communities that have been underserved. And so bottom line on this bill, it's going to lead to disaster recovery going to communities faster and being used more equitably. And if you are interested in connecting with our Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition, a couple of my colleagues are experts in this area, and I can drop a link in the chat in a few minutes to get more involved with their work. Okay, so moving on to a couple of other provisions that are part of the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. The Rural Housing Service Reform Act makes changes to U.S. Department of Agriculture's rural housing service programs. This was a pretty comprehensive bill, something that we've been advocating for many years. And so I just wanted to highlight 3 of the provisions. There's a lot more in there, and I can certainly send out more information about this bill, but a few of the things that are really good in there. One of them is going to impact properties that receive both mortgages and I see a note that says the audio has cut out. Has everybody's audio cut out?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, we'll keep going, and hopefully
fine.
Okay, hopefully the recording will help everybody catch up. Thank you. So Rural Housing Service Reform Act, one of the things it does is for USDA RD, the rural development properties that have received both a mortgage and rental assistance from the USDA. The situation that happens now is once the mortgage matures, the property also loses its rental assistance. We all know how vital rental assistance is for families to maintain affordability on their homes. And so what this provision does is something called decoupling, which means that once the mortgage expires, the property is able to keep that rental assistance, whereas the status quo now is they're at risk of losing that rental assistance. So that's a huge win for families living in those properties. One of the other things it does is it provides capacity building grants for rural areas. Another interesting thing, there's a grant program for low-income rural homeowners, and it's increasing the maximum amount. Currently, it's $7,500. It's increasing that amount to $15,000. So hopefully, that's going to help a lot of folks make repairs on their home. The next provision that we've supported is the Choice and Affordable Housing Act. And I'll note that this Choice and Affordable Housing Act, like many of the bills, was a standalone bill that got incorporated into 21st Century Road to Housing Act. It was originally like a much more comprehensive bill to make a lot of changes to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. The 21st Century Road to Housing Act just pulled in a few of the provisions related to inspections for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So one of the things it does is it allows for pre-inspection of units. So if you have a voucher and you're going into a unit, you don't, now you would have to wait until the owner works with the PHA to set up an inspection. We can have some delays, frustration for all parties. So now people can have their units inspected up to 12 months in advance of somebody moving in. So it just makes that happen faster. The other piece of it is that if a home or an apartment building receives some other type of federal assistance, say they've received home or tax credits, and their units have been inspected for the purposes of their program, that inspection is able to fill the requirement for the Housing Choice Voucher. And then the other piece of that is if the unit is in a rural or remote area, they're allowed to do video inspections. So my next slide just has a summary of a few of the other good provisions that we have highlighted. The Price Act is going to provide grants for manufactured housing communities that need to make repairs. The Housing Supply Expansion Act removes the chassis requirement for new manufactured homes. So that's going to save money, open up some design options. The Innovation Fund is actually one of the few pieces of this bill that actually has funding attached to it. So that'll provide grants for housing and community development. And then there are a couple of provisions in here related to homelessness programs. So the first, incentivizing local solutions to Homelessness Act provides flexibilities in how communities can use their emergency shelter grant funding. And then the Housing Unhoused Disabled Veterans Act will help more disabled veterans qualify for rental assistance. And I'll drop a link into a chat that for a resource that covers these in a little bit more detail and includes some additional provisions. But now I'm going to hand it over to Stephen to cover some more provisions.
Thank you, Libby. And I'm going to focus on some of the reforms that are on the home ownership side of the bill. That's largely because our advocacy has focused on those areas, and that is where Intend focuses on the housing side, is on home ownership initiatives around the state. So the largest reforms are really in the home program. There are quite a few of these provisions that have been barriers for home that have been addressed through this reauthorization and reform bill. Starting with the set aside for CHODOs, community housing development organizations, they have reworded how the set aside for CHODOs can be invested into housing programs, and removes, some of you are probably familiar with the developed, sponsored, or owned language that has been part of our CHODO recertifications for probably 40 years. And they replaced it with materially participate. So it gives a lot more flexibility. It reflects how nonprofits are participating in housing in different ways than they have historically. So home can still be invested in those housing initiatives, even if it doesn't align with how home has been used historically. It expands eligibility for different kinds of housing. So home can now be, well, once implemented, it can be used to convert existing buildings into residential. So that has been something that's been challenging or not possible to do historically. I would say the two biggest changes that will make it far more flexible are the resolution to the 95% rule, which, for those of you who aren't aware, 95% rule, any home supported home ownership unit cannot appraise for more than 95% of the median home value in that jurisdiction. And so if it's over 95%, it is ineligible. And they've resolved this issue in two ways. One is that they raised the limit from 95 to 110%. And the second is that the 110% limit is now able to be calculated based off of how much the home buyer's mortgage is rather than the appraised value. So that gives a lot more flexibility as to where home ownership opportunities can be developed within home. The second major reform is that home ownership supported with home grants can also go up to 100% of the AMI now instead of 80%. So that allows home to be used for more mixed income type developments as well. And then there are two kind of reforms to NEPA. Broadly, there's an exemption for infill projects that applies even beyond home. There are some limitations to that broader exemption, but then for home specifically, there's actually a categorical exemption. So you don't even have to go through a process in order for infill housing to be exempt from your environmental reviews, as long as it's 15 units or fewer. So that saves a lot of time and administrative burden, which for everyone who uses home understands that that is kind of what home is known for, is the administrative burden. You want to go to the next slide, Rachel? Then the Whole Home Repair Act is really the first owner-occupied repair program, exclusively owner-occupied repair program. So this is authorized, but it's not funded. So I just wanted to highlight this largely because Senator Young was one of the sponsors and has been a strong advocate for it. It provides the opportunity for grants and loans to both low-income homeowners and what are called closely held landlords. I think the limit is 25 units or fewer. There are some limitations to this, obviously. The landlords have to agree to rent increase caps, and this is as these programs are implemented, as I'm sure many of you know, there are minimum requirements that HUD requires, but local jurisdictions can require things that are more restrictive. So I think the minimum is 3 years at 5% increase, but local jurisdictions can require increased caps that extend longer than that. And then I think very significantly, it allows for what are called programmatic proxies for verifying income. So this is something that a lot of federal grant programs are moving towards. I know we use this under some of the CDFI fund grants, where you, instead of having to verify household income, there are some programmatic proxies that you can use. So if a household is qualified for SNAP, Medicaid, TANF, supplemental Social Security, they automatically can qualify for the Whole Home Repair Grant Program. So they don't have to provide their income verification over again. And this is one of those provisions that we've been advocating for, making it less of a barrier for qualifying homeowners and beneficiaries to have to go through this process over and over again for all of these different programs. There are limitations to this program as well. They have to be focused on accessibility, energy efficiency, and habitability. And I think one of the themes broadly from this law is that it focuses on streamlining processes and building on activities that have already been implemented. So it is there are many references to collaboration, and like in whole homes. It specifically calls out language around you have to have demonstrably shown that this program works. It is high. These will be highly competitive. They're only going to be at maximum 10 grantees across the whole country. And I think this is one of the things for us to be keeping in mind. Andrew brought up at the beginning a statewide housing strategy. I think to be competitive in these programs that have been created, really thinking about what the outcomes we are trying to achieve are, working together, being focused on supplementing the programs that are working. I think Whole Home actually explicitly says that it can only be used to supplement existing programs. So you can't create something new. They want to build off of interventions that are already working. Are there more slides? I can't remember. Yeah. Oh, yeah. A couple of other things that are important. CDBG has been updated. Some of you may know that only community-based development organizations currently can use CDBG for new housing construction. That's changed. That restriction is removed, and communities can now use up to 20% of their allocation for new housing construction with CDBG. I already mentioned NEPA exemption for all infill projects. There are also new programs, again, highly competitive, affordable housing planning grants, again, building off of existing activities. One of the programs that I think is instructive for this is pro housing. If you look at the pro housing NOFA, I think this is the same kind of structure where they want to know what are your previous activities, how have they been measurably successful, and how are you building off of them? It's the same kind of language in these grants. The Innovation Fund, it defines attainable housing at 120% AMI. The Innovation Fund does allow you to go up to 120% AMI, but there are requirements that majority of it is 60% AMI and below. But this is one of the few that was funded, I think $200 million a year. And again, it will be highly competitive. And so paying attention to those requirements that will make Indiana communities competitive for these funds is going to be incredibly important. And I already mentioned, I think that home can be used to convert vacant structures into residential. And I don't know that we put this in there, but the other thing that's worth mentioning, and I know there are several bankers on the call as well, the public welfare investment cap has been raised from 15% to 20%. So this is what allows banks to use their assets to buy tax credits for LIHTC, new markets tax credits, historic tax credits. The cap has been at 15%. And the hope is that by raising the cap to 20%, that it will improve the pricing for tax credit purchases. All that being said, we're not sure what the impact will be because regulators still have to approve banks going above anything over 5 anyway, and CRA is a little bit in flux right now. And so, but the possibility for the banks that are coming up to that 15% cap to go up to 20 is now raised. So that's certainly in the long run an opportunity for more funding to flow into those programs.
All right. So I just wanted to cover more kind of from the perspective of low-income housing, thinking about serving people with extremely low incomes. Just to point out that that there are a lot of things that our organization has been pushing for a long time and will continue to push for that aren't in the bill. So as Stephen mentioned, funding is pretty limited. There's a few pilot programs. They'll be very competitive, like the Innovation Fund and the Reside Act. In addition, there's no funding to develop or preserve deeply affordable supply for extremely low income renters. There's no funding for rental assistance and public housing. And then that last bullet point I mentioned, because in the original version of the bill, there was a big piece that would reform homelessness programs that was eventually dropped out. So we're seeing a lot of leaders in the and the legislature kind of refer to this as like a first step, and they have other ideas that they want to keep building on this. And so these are some of the things that are priorities for NLIHC and our network. But of course, there's opportunities for, you know, a Road 2.0 we're already hearing about. So for things that weren't in the bill, you know, keep pushing for them. We could kind of build on this momentum. Next slide. So the next question, next steps are about implementation. And I think at this point, this will probably be a sort of, we'll pass it around between Stephen and Kayla and me and talk about ways that you can continue to be involved. The bill is passed, but there's still a lot of opportunities for advocacy. So I'll talk really quick about the rulemaking process. Many of these provisions will require HUD or whichever agency is in charge of the program to go through the rulemaking process. And that's an opportunity for advocates to weigh in on kind of the details about how these programs are implemented. It's a bit, in my opinion, kind of a tedious way of doing advocacy, but very, very important. So a proposed rule is introduced, and typically you have about 60 days to provide comments on that, and then a final rule is issued. So that's a really great way to get involved. If you get NLIHC emails, we send out opportunities to comment. If we do a sign-on letter, we send out opportunities about that. And maybe some of your organizations are also involved in that rulemaking advocacy. Appropriations is another part. There are a few of these programs that are going to need appropriations. So for example, the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program, it's going to need funding. So that's something that we're really going to be pushing for appropriations. And for the state and local bit, Stephen and Kayla want to take it away for that?
Sure, I can throw my 2 cents in. I mean, firstly, +1 to everything that Libby said. And I'll also share, I know that there was a slide with this. I'm a senior organizer on the team. And so part of my role is really deeply engaging directly impacted people, tenants namely, in moving forward this kind of policy that's going to change the material lived conditions that they're experiencing. And that many of us are experiencing. And so everything that Libby said, +1, and the importance of helping and supporting and working with communities to understand how these rules are actually then implemented and kind of pan out for how people experience their lives. The ability to advocate at the federal level around appropriations. Like this, while we talk about local and state advocacy a little bit differently, it's all part of kind of a flow, if you will, right? So everything that happens at the federal level, when it then moves into the local and state, that impacts people at the local and state, and how it impacts people really depends on local and statewide infrastructure. And so conversations like this, right, matter for that, aligning on what feels most important, and then what you can then advocate for as implementation pans out, particularly when resources are scarce or not as much as we would want them to be. And so we would always just encourage the folks that are on this call, other folks that you're in a relationship with, to really think about how implementation of these federal wins, right? All the things that Libby and Steve spoke so much about, how they will actually kind of work, right, in local communities, and what are the levers that folks can use, whether it's the states, the state legislator is getting these funds or like interpreting these rules, then they're going to decide how it actually works in the state, whether funding comes to local communities, whether that's the city or the county. But at the end of the day, I'll just say, and then I'll kick it to Steve, that we really believe that it's vital that tenants and those that are directly impacted by these rules, by the administrative rules, by the legislation, are really deeply embedded in decision making, and both advocacy and organizing at the local and state level, so that we know that the policies that we're pushing are rooted in real lived experience, and that we're building the people power. That's how we talk about it, right? The organized people, a large amount of people that are all aligned and pushing in the same direction. Because at the end of the day, we know that there's amazing policy out there, there's amazing research out there, and if every decision that was made was made off of great research and excellent policy, our world would look very different, right? And so making sure that folks, right, the folks that we work with, that we serve, are really at the center, so that we're ensuring that all of our actions are ultimately resulting in things that will change the lives of those that we work with and allow our communities to truly thrive. Steve?
Well, then I will +2 what Libby and you said. The rulemaking process is arduous, but I think it is important that we continue to be engaged as HUD works through, not just HUD, but I think there are about 15 agencies that are involved in some way, not just rulemakings, but also guidance to communities. Obviously, the appropriations will continue to be important. But again, these are not these changes don't become real automatically, and so local governments, PJs in the state, will have to update their consolidated plan, their action plan, their policies and procedures. All of that will need to go through a process. And so things like, using CDBG for new construction, that does not happen automatically. And if we want to advocate for it, we need to push for the consolidated plan and the policies and procedures locally to be updated. So there is a lot more to continue to be done. And then the last thing I would say about this is that this provides directionality from where we think the federal government will be investing in housing long term. And Andrew brought this up at the beginning. Like, how do we get the state and local governments to align with and be able to take full advantage of these programs? So there are many places in this law where it explicitly says it's supposed to supplement, it's supposed to align with, it's supposed to advance. All of those things will need to be implemented now in order for any future funding to be coming to Indiana, because these will be very competitive programs.
And Stephen,
Thank
if I
you so
could,
much for
thank you
that.
for that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, if I could, I'll just jump right in for a second to reinforce everything that's been said here. And I want to look at, there's a question in the chat, I think this really gets to it. What organization is acting as the lead convener to ensure Indiana has a highly competitive application for our state for things like the Innovation Fund and the Whole Home Repair Pilot Program? And to what's been said so far, I think there's a couple answers to that. Ultimately, the buck stops with the governor's office inside state government. However, outside of state government, folks, it's us. And by that, I don't necessarily just mean Prosperity Indiana, but I mean our network, our members, and our partners. And we all are going to need to continue to participate in that advocacy if we're going to get the most out of that limited funding in some of those competitive projects. I'm dropping in the chat there's been nearly 100 people on this call. A bunch of you I know have been the signers of the effort that we've had to encourage the governor to create a housing commission to really focus on creating a statewide strategy. And while we haven't seen that specific commission come to fruition, there have been some meetings that have come out of that. Stephen joined myself and our executive director in meeting with the Secretary of Business Affairs, Mike Speedy. We had a follow-up meeting a couple of weeks ago. We know that they're aware that this bill has passed and that there's going to be some need for those competitive applications. So all of that is to say that when you see from us in the coming weeks and months, if we put out a request to help comment on on regulations, if you see us doing another sign-on letter or asked to participate in, public hearings or any other opportunities, that's where we, as a statewide network and as the sector, can come together at scale and try to make sure that our priorities, especially for low and moderate income Hoosiers and communities, are at play. So that's my plug to stay with us and be keeping an eye out for those opportunities. And although I know we're really specifically talking about the 21st Century Road to Housing Act now, there's a few other things. There's things coming up. The Community Reinvestment Act, that's up for new comments. And at the state level, the state budget session, that's going to be another opportunity to help advocate for an aligned state and federal strategy. So we don't want to see these things piecemeal or in silos. We want to elevate our network's ability to be able to effectively advocate for all of them. So Rachel, that's my 2 cents. I'll turn it back over to you for the discussion.
Well, and before we move on from the kind of what's next of it all, I would also love to hear from you, Andrew, because we have a budget session at the Indiana General Assembly coming up. And if you could just talk a little bit about how we try to channel advocacy at the state level as well, and the opportunities that presents to kind of step up the opportunity that we see with 21st Century Road.
Sure. And so this is more of things to be looking for. At the state level, there have been some significant cuts to housing and things that affect housing. The state totally cut its housing first appropriation during the last state budget cycle in 2025. So in just a few months in 2027, the decisions will be made about, are we going to restore those cuts now that we have a little bit of a rosier fiscal position at the state level? Or are we going to see additional cuts or erosion in services? There's also opportunities to have new investments, to do things like reimagine the ways the state uses its state housing trust fund to be able to supplement some of the opportunities that are coming from this federal bill. And even things like when Stephen mentioned that in the whole home repair program, that they're going to prioritize, collaborations. There may be opportunities to use some existing but unused pots of funds at the state level to show, hey, we're ponying up, we're putting skin in the game, we're serious about these investments in housing.
Yes, so with that plug, definitely please all stay engaged and keep your eye on your inboxes. We try not to reach out to you all unless there's something timely and impactful and an opportunity to take some real action. So, definitely please stay involved with Prosperity Indiana and the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition, because we're going into a budget session and we want to make sure that our lawmakers hear from those of us who believe that housing for low-income renters and stabilizing investments are a worthy use of the funds that our state has. So I think I'm just going to roll us forward. These are some resources that Libby has put together. These links will all be live when we follow up with the slide deck. Again, that follow-up message will come tomorrow or on Monday. And then we have some contact information here. But I want to leave, we've got 5 minutes left. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, and I want to thank you, those of you who have been dropping questions in the chat. There was one in particular that I saw that I want to call out. So let me just scroll up in that. Let's start with Mr. Tilkemeyer's question. Will IHCDA be leading Indiana in the kind of the process to compete for these grant opportunities?
I'd reiterate, and so I don't know for sure, but I'd say the buck stops with the governor. It's going to be his decision. It's the state administrations. That's their opportunity and their responsibility to make sure Indiana's competitive for these pilot and other competitive funding programs. Whether he then decides that it's the executive director of IHCDA or, their staff that should be writing those applications, or if it comes from the governor's office, it still kind of comes from the same place. And then I think, while we as outside of state government can't directly influence that, we can make sure that the attention and our advocacy efforts are ensuring that we're as competitive as possible. Stephen, I don't know if you have any other thoughts or anything else to say about that process or what you think could or should happen.
Oh, I don't know what should happen, but yes, I think IHCDA will be involved in a lot of the rulemakings, but not just IHCDA. Okra will be charged with the provisions that are affected by CDBG, since they manage the state's allocation of CDBG. But then all of the participating jurisdictions will need to go through rulemakings and updates to their guidance as well. And I don't remember how many there are, but 13 or so participating jurisdictions around the state. So there will be many processes involved in fully realizing the possibilities in 21st Century Road.
Then I just want to throw out, there was a quick question about BABA, or the Build American, Buy American provision. Libby, would you be able to speak to how that requirement has been modified in 21st Century Road? And then Stephen, would you be able to speak to how that has impacted your operations in development?
Yeah, sure. So the home provision that was included in road does touch on BABA. It requires a study of the implementation, because this has been a real frustration and something that adds time and expense. And so there's a requirement to review implementation and then issue new guidance. I can also share about another bill that has some other BABA related, but yeah, Stephen.
And there was an executive order issued at the end of last month as well that I think exempts single family housing from BABA explicitly. But yes, it hasn't affected us that much, but our colleagues that do a lot of multifamily development, it has caused a lot of delays and increases in development costs as well. So the study is probably it was kind of a compromise, my understanding, and I think we'll have better clarity as to when and where BABA applies by the end of the year, hopefully.
And then there has been a good amount of discussion of just like streamlining reforms. And I think we all, have heard the phrase time is money. But could you provide just a little bit of elaboration and color to that thought when it comes to affordable housing development and how it affects the project's penciling, so to speak?
Yeah, I think this is one of those areas where it is underappreciated how much uncertainty is created by the environmental review process. It's across different jurisdictions. It's the timeline is completely different as to how long it takes to go through that process. And so when you're putting projects together for funding, you put your pro forma together, you go through a application process, you get awarded funds. That's all assuming that you're going to have a certain development timeline, which can be completely thrown off by environmental review processes that may take 2 months or they may take a year. And I think the infill exemption will give a lot better clarity as to what the development timelines are, will reduce costs, and allow projects to move on a more regular cadence. And then the overall infill exemption, that should help a lot of different types of projects, not just housing projects as well. But again, those are all processes that have to be implemented by all of these jurisdictions. So.
And I will give our last question to Andrew, and then we will wrap up.
All right. I want to, give both Stephen and then our friends from National Low Income Housing Coalition a chance to, maybe kind of sum up. And, forgive me if this is a bit of a curveball. But, Stephen, could you talk about from your perspective, like if Indiana does things right, if we do, apply for these competitive funds, and if we have that kind of alignment, what impact could this bill, passed legislation, make for the type of work that Intend does in Indiana? And then maybe on the other hand, like what are the stakes that if it doesn't, what could be lost or what could not be realized if we don't do it right? And then Libby and Kayla, I won't ask you to speak specifically for Indiana, but what again, like what could be the best potential impact for low income renter households? And then maybe if it's not implemented fully, like what could we stand to lose?
Well, I'll start by saying I think the direction that Congress provided through this law is very much focused on outcomes and having more impact rather than just being focused on outputs. And so the way that the law is written is very much focused on incentivizing collaboration, leveraging local resources, building off of programs that have been demonstrated to work and be impactful. And so I think that's as future funding and appropriations come, I think that the communities that have leaned into that are going to be the ones that benefit. And so it behooves us to align our organizations, our local resources, and our state resources around positioning ourselves to take advantage of these resources as they become available. And I think, to Rachel's point earlier, I think in the shorter term, it has the possibility of removing a lot of uncertainty around timeline, which has been one of the biggest challenges, especially on the home ownership side. We have lots of low income home buyers where it's not easy for us to tell them when a house will be done, and that's thinking about it from the perspective of the people that we're trying to serve. Removing the administrative burden for them. I think all of this aligns towards trying to simplify, streamline, and create opportunities to work together to do more.
Libby or Kayla, any final thoughts?
I'll put in very briefly my 2 cents, which is that when we're talking about organizing and deeply engaging communities, that's for the long haul, right? And so the implementation and collaboration around implementation of this legislation, the rules, what's coming down the pike is an opportunity, right? To really build strong infrastructure or to continue to build strong infrastructure that centers collective decision-making, that centers people that will be directly impacted by these policies. Right. And so, that's all. And I know Libby and I will both leave you with the fact that we're always open to have further conversations. So I won't go too far into it. But I really think that kind of bigger picture couched in this piece of legislation, but but part of kind of the longer road is that this, like other pieces of similar legislation, is an opportunity to continue to build the infrastructure necessary to achieve the big vision, right? That all of us have a safe, decent, affordable place to call home, and that is only possible when we do that together. Libby?
That's a great way to end it, I think. I won't add anything to that.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and I appreciate everybody's patience. I know we ran a little bit over, but I think we could have had 2.5 hours to talk about this bill, and we would have used all 2.5 hours and gone 5 minutes over that. But I want everybody to be able to move on with your day. So I dropped my email in the chat. If you have any questions that we weren't able to get to, feel free to email those to me, and I will do my best to sort of corral answers. So there's a document that answers those in our follow-up message that will also include the slides and full recording. Thank you all so much for being here. I would like to formally adjourn and let you all enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thanks so much to Rachel for putting this together.
Thank you.
Bye all.